goes to church here at True Life. He masquerades as a guitar player in our band on Sunday mornings. He's a lawyer during the week, and his wife is Tiffany, and Ethan and Corey are his kids. David's actually written a book. If you have any interest in this subject, it's a huge hot-button topic in our world today. He's written a book about the issue of homosexuality and homosexual marriage and all that. It's called Love Speech. If you have any interest after you hear him speak, you can go on Amazon, put in David Robinson Love Speech. I'm sure you can find it. And so if you're interested, I encourage you to check that out. But he's going to start with the video and then make him feel welcome. Listen closely as he shares about truth today.
I think probably one of the main issues that people wrestle with is the reality of God. And when we do not understand this cosmic battle that has been raging from the very beginning between God's truth and the lies of the world, the flesh, and the devil, we take the truth claims of the world as if they're true. And when we live according to the lies and the illusions of the world, then we suffer deeply.
The single most important question any human being can ask is the question, what is truth? So when Pilate looked at Jesus, and Pilate says, what is truth? And walks away. Pilate walked away from the greatest authority on the greatest question and committed the greatest crime at that time.
What a question, what is truth? That's a really hard question, what is truth?
What is truth? We understand it in a way that makes sense for us.
Truth is very hard to give a definition to, I think.
It's one of the most pivotal times in history. I have never sensed a more momentous occasion than now. The world is reeling with uncertainty. It's almost like it's in the air.
Everything's truth is coming from our mind, I believe.
I might interpret truth through the lens of science. I might interpret truth through the lens of some ideology, perhaps communism.
We've got a crisis of truth, not only in the universities, but in the culture. For us, truth is relative and subjective and pragmatic and so on. At its worst, truth is dead.
What is truth? Different people with different value systems may have different, what they see as truth.
I truly believe there's a difference between fact and truth.
There is a real sense of fear and uncertainty, and nobody seems to have the answers.
Truth is hard to define because everybody sees things in different ways.
I have a bit of the truth, you have a bit of the truth.
Truth is everything's coming from our inside. That's truth, never coming from the outside.
There are many ways to interpret, understand, and experience truth. It's relative.
Morning. Is this working? We're on? Okay, good. I'm really excited to be here today for a couple reasons. First of all, I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about worldview. I love talking about truth because, like Brett said, it is so powerful in the way that it changes us. It changes the way that we see the world. It changes the way that we see everything. And particularly, I'm glad to be here today to talk to you all because you all are it. You all are the next generation that's coming up that's going to decide what the world looks like going forward. And it's more important than ever for you all to understand these concepts, to understand what truth is, to understand who Jesus is, to understand what the Bible says. Because as you move forward, your ideas will have consequences. The people that came before you, their ideas have had consequences. There's nothing that's happened in this world at any time that has not come from somebody's ideas. Nazism, communism, every evil that you've ever seen in the world has started with somebody having an idea, somebody having a worldview, and that worldview was grown into something that caused something else. Sometimes that causes evil, sometimes it causes good. The worldview that began when Christ died and rose again on the cross and exploded across the world was a good thing, and many, many good things came of it. The worldviews that have always been around before Christ and long after him that are evil, they've always caused problems. So remember that ideas have consequences, and remember that you are going to be responsible for this world, for what you do here, and whether or not your concentration has been on this world or whether or not your concentration has been on the next world. Because if your concentration is on heaven, then what you do in this world is going to be guided towards that, and your worldview is going to direct the way that you act. So what is truth? Why did Jesus, who was the Son of God, come to earth? I mean, he came to earth clearly, to get us out of that boat, to get us out of the water, like Brett said, to save us. He came to earth to heal, and he came to earth to teach. But why did he come to the earth? He tells us, if you put that first slide up, Jesus is been arrested, and he's going to be crucified, and he's talking to Pilate. And I think in your notes that's spelled P-I-L-O-T, but it was not somebody who was a captain of a plane. It's actually spelled P-I-L-A-T-E. Pilate was the governor, and the governor's asking him, he's having this conversation with Jesus because he's not really sure why he's there and why these people are so angry with him. And he asks him if he's a king. Okay, and he talks about that, and then Jesus tells him why he's there. And this is what he says. He says, "For this cause I was brought into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." So Jesus is saying, look, I'm here for all these other things, but ultimately I'm here to testify to the truth. So the truth, knowing what the truth is probably pretty important. It's probably something that we ought to know. And the world has given us a lot of ideas of what the truth might be. Let's talk about that, because the first thing that happens after Jesus says this is Pilate says, "What is truth?" See, back then, 2,000 years ago, just like today, because you could hear this from anybody today. You heard that girl get asked, "What is truth?" "I don't know. What is truth?" Pilate was asking the same thing. What is truth? What is it? Let's talk about what it's not. Truth is not simply whatever works. Okay, that's called pragmatism. Whatever works, like, well, I need to get an A on my test, so that's the important thing. So if I cheat, I can get that A. The truth must be that it's okay to cheat because it's good to get an A, so it must be okay to cheat. Well, of course, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's not truth. The ends don't justify the means. Truth is not just what works. Truth is not what makes you feel good. A lot of people, especially in the arena of morality, a lot of people want to talk about what makes me feel good or what makes me happy. There are lots of things that are true that don't make us very happy. The fact that a lot of people are going to hell is true, but it's not going to make them happy, and doesn't make them happy, right? The truth is not what the majority says. We live in a democracy, and we've become very, we've brought up ourselves and our country in a worldview that looks at the vote of the people as something very important, and in fact it is. Democracy is very important. But the fact that we can get 51% of people to say something does not make that thing true. Okay, we see this now in the arena of, say, same-sex marriage, where some states have voted to make same-sex marriage legal, essentially proclaiming same-sex marriage is good or same-sex marriage is right. Well, either it's right or it's not, but it has nothing to do with how many people voted for. Okay, so the majority does not make truth. Truth is not defined by what is intended. Good intentions can be wrong. Well, I meant to do something good. I really wanted to do something good, so that makes it true. Well, it doesn't make it true. It's true if it's true, and it doesn't matter what you intended. Truth is not about how we know things. I really feel that this is true. Well, you may really feel that something is true, but what matters is whether it is true or not whether or not you feel that it's true. Okay? There's a few ways we can define truth. We can say that truth is that which corresponds to reality. It's telling it like it is. It's saying what is. Okay? Truth is the real. What's really real. What really exists. There's a couple different kinds of truth, or a couple different kinds of worldviews and the way that they look at truth. And I'm going to break it down in kind of simply for you, because there are actually a number of them, but they all fall into one of two camps. One camp is called objective truth, and one camp is called subjective truth. Objective truth is truth that is real, regardless of what anybody thinks or believes. Subjective truth is the truth that an individual person believes inside themselves, having nothing to do with whether that thing is actually real. Subjective truth would say whatever's real is what's real to me. Okay, let's talk about objective truth first. There's a guy named Plato. He was a philosopher. Lived around 400 BC in ancient Greece. And he was a philosopher. He was a student of a guy named Socrates. And Plato was very concerned with the idea of truth. He wanted to know and discover what truth was and whether or not there was truth, because at the time that he lived, and in fact at all times that anyone's ever lived, people have questioned truth. What is true? How can we know what is true? These ideas of objective and subjective truth have always been around. If you think about it, in the Garden of Eden, Satan is talking to Eve, and she says, God told me to do this. What does he say? Did God really say that? Is that really true? Is that really true? So from the very beginning of time, subjective truth and objective truth have been at war with each other. So Plato's trying to figure this out, and he believed that there was objective truth. He believed that truth existed out there in reality, and it was not in our mind. He told a story about a cave where there were men who were chained, and they were sitting on a bench in a cave and looking at a wall. And behind them was the sun coming into the cave, okay? And on that wall, they would see shadows. They would see shadows of birds and deer and people and apples and whatever, things. But they would always only see, all they knew, because from the time they were born, basically, they're looking at this wall, all they knew was the shadow. So to them, the shadow was reality. That's what they saw, that's all they knew, and so that's what they believed was real. An apple was this black shape on the wall that the sun made, and so on and so forth. All these things, that's what was real. Well, at some point, one of these guys gets freed, and he turns around, and he comes out of the cave, and he sees the real things. And when he sees the real things, he recognizes that those things that were on the wall were really nothing at all. They were just shadows. They weren't real. They weren't true. So Plato is trying to say there is the real that's out there. Now there's two things that he's trying to prove, really. The first one is that you can be deceived about what's real. The second thing is that when you find out what's real, it changes you. And then when you try to go back and tell the guys in the cave what's real, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to say you're crazy. All they've ever seen are these shadows on the wall. So it is not uncommon, even in Plato's time, for people to reject truth like these men who were still in the cave would have done for the guy who came back. Okay? So Plato's saying there is a reality that's out there. He believed that there was a reality, not just about apples and deer and people and things, but that there was a reality about love and God and justice and peace He believed that all those things had a reality and that what we saw on earth was a shadow of what these things were in the mind of God. So when we see justice, we have a justice system. I'm an attorney and a Christian, which, you can have both of those things at the same time, believe it or not. But I deal with justice, right? But I know more than you know that it's not always justice, right? For a number of reasons that are beyond the control of this system that we've set up, that we've tried to create justice in, for a lot of reasons that are beyond the control of that system, justice doesn't always happen. People lie on the witness stand. People cheat. People do things to subvert justice. And in fact, even when we do try to do our best, the men and women who mete out justice, the judges, aren't perfect either. So we don't have perfect justice, but we all understand that there is such a thing as perfect justice, something real that exists out there. That's what he's talking about, okay? So Plato is suggesting that these things are real. And in fact, we have some scripture that really comports with what he said perfectly, okay? In 1 Corinthians, Paul writes, "For now we see in a mirror dimly." Sound familiar? "But then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known." So Paul is expressing the same thing that Plato, who was not right about everything, and of course he was before Christ, so wasn't a Christian, but Plato was seeing something. God was revealing something to him. In Romans, the Bible tells us that we can have things revealed to us through nature that are true, and that's what's happened is Plato has seen the nature of things and recognized that there is a truth that has been somehow turned into a shadow, somehow subverted. Of course, we know why that is, because of the fall. The fall has caused us to not be able to see truth in its perfection. And as a result of that, many people question whether truth is real or not at all. If you ever read the book, The Last Battle in the Chronicles of Narnia, you'll see this point made again, where C.S. Lewis has the children going through a door. And on the other side of this door, they're in this land, this beautiful, beyond description, beautiful land, with these fruits that, the children are eating, and he's saying, I can't even describe to you what the flavor was like. You'll have to wait until you get there someday to see this beyond anything on earth you could ever imagine land. And as the children are there, and as they're moving and as they're walking, one by one, they begin to realize that the land that they're in is actually Narnia. It's actually Narnia, but not the Narnia that they'd been in. The Narnia that was real. The one that they really knew the other one should have been if it could have been perfect. Essentially, C.S. Lewis is describing heaven. Okay? So the idea here, to bring it down to you on the objective truth issue, the idea here is that there is something real, that it exists, that it's outside of your own mind, that it's outside of you, that it exists and that it's real, and that not only do things like chairs and people exist, but things like God and morality exist, that those things are real things. Okay, so that's the objective truth view. It does not depend on what we believe. I could say, I believe that this building is not really here. Right? I could say that. I could say that I believed that. But it wouldn't matter what I believed. This building is either here or it's not here. Does that make sense? It's either is or it isn't. It's not dependent on me. I'll tell you a little joke. There's a philosophy called solipsism. You don't need to remember that or write it down, because it's just a joke I'm going to tell you. But it is real. There is a real philosophy. It's called solipsism. And that philosophy, for the people who believe in it, they believe that everything that exists in the world, besides themselves, is a figment of their own imagination. They've created the whole world. So for the solipsist, all of you are just figments of their imagination. A little self-centered of a view, but that's the truth. That's the worldview that they take on. And so there was a philosopher named Alvin Plantinga, and he heard about this guy who was a solipsist, and he really wanted to meet somebody who really had this view. And so he went and he met the guy, and the guy was surprisingly nice to him, for considering the fact that Mr. Plantinga was just a figment of the guy's imagination. He was surprisingly nice. And after he was done talking, he came out, and one of the assistants of this professor, who was a solipsist, was talking to Alvin, and, Alvin asked about the professor, and they said, well, we take very good care of this professor. And he said, why? And they said, well, because, if he's gone, we're all gone. Because, of course, everybody exists in his mind. Okay. Anyway, maybe it wasn't a funny joke, but for a philosopher it was, okay? Philosophy jokes. Okay. So once again, objective truth is truth that exists independently of any person. It is out there. It is not in your mind. It's real. What you think of when you say real. Subjective truth is truth that exists only in the mind of individuals. Okay? It's only what's in your mind. It's what you believe, whether or not what you believe is actually real. I'm using the word subjective truth here. Of course, as we talk, you'll realize I don't think subjective truth is truth at all. But it is what they call it. They call it subjective truth. It's my truth. The lady on the video, was, well, I could see it from this perspective, or I could see it from that perspective. That type of thing. You've probably heard people talk subjectively about truth. One of the main philosophies where we see this is called relativism, which we'll get to in a minute. But that's a subjective truth theory. So some people will say, in society, there is no truth. You may have heard somebody say that, you may not have, but people say it. Trust me. They say, there is no truth. There's no truth. So when they do, and although I agree with Brett that the idea for today is not to pack your toolbox full of little zingers that we can go get the non-Christians with when they bring stuff up. Nevertheless, I'm going to give you a couple. And the reason is because it's important that we do look into the things that other people say and identify whether they're true or not. So if somebody says to you, there is no truth, the simple question to ask them is that statement true? Think about that for a second. Because if the statement is true, then the statement is false, right? We call that a logically suicidal view. Okay? It commits suicide on itself. If it's in fact what it says it is, then it's in fact what it doesn't say it is. So those who say that, and people do say it, it's nonsense. And you can point that out relatively quickly. Okay? So there must be some truth, because we can't even say there is no truth and have that make sense. There must be some kind of truth out there. So let's look at how people look at truth. Relativism, which we talked about a second ago, okay? The philosophy of relativism says that all truth is relative. When they say relative, they mean subjective, what we just talked about. Objective truth, subjective truth. Relativism is subjective. So they're saying all truth is subjective. It's only in the minds of individual people. There's no such thing as objective truth that exists out there. So they're kind of all like the solipsist guy, sort of, to some extent. What is true is in my mind. What is true for you is in your mind. And that's all there is. You may have heard someone say at some point, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Has anybody ever heard anybody say that? May be true for you, but it's not true for me. People say it all the time. We see relativism when people talk about morality the most often. Most often place you're going to see relativism come up is when people talk about morality, what's right and what's wrong. And they'll use, instead of saying that may be true for you, they'll say, that may be right for you, but that's not right for me. That may be wrong for you, but that's not wrong for me. This is where the concept in our society of tolerance has kind of gained a foothold. You've probably all heard about tolerance and how you're supposed to be tolerant. You're told all the time about how you're supposed to be tolerant of the views and opinions of other people, which is true. We have to allow people to hold views that we may disagree with. We have to allow them to hold those views, okay? However, tolerance does not mean that we must accept everyone's view as equally true. It's okay to believe that other people are wrong sometimes. If I really believed that this building didn't exist, you could allow me to have that view and be tolerant of me, but you would still know that it was nonsense, right? Tolerance today, the way that it's preached religiously, it requires that the other person holds that that my view and their view are equally true. They're equally true. See, what they want you to accept is they want you to accept that belief in relativism and subjective truth is just as true as belief in objective truth. Now, this is called think again. I'm going to ask you to think for a second. Think about this. If it's true that belief in if you have to believe that belief in relativism is just as true as belief in objective truth, that's the same thing as them asking you to just accept relativism for yourself. If you're only allowed to believe that objective truth is true to you, then you're just a relativist also. You just happen to be a relativist who believes in objective truth, which is a very confused relativist, but nevertheless, it's relativism. And they want to force it on you. And they do it in the disguise of tolerance. You've got to be tolerant. You have to accept what I have to say, and you have to accept it as equally valuable and true as what you have to say, okay? There are two problems with relativism, okay? And let me just be really clear. Relativism is the prevailing worldview of our culture. It is the prevailing worldview of our culture. The people in our culture are by and large relativists. Even some Christians talk like they're relativists sometimes. Well, my church is good for me. I understand that you don't really go in for that sort of thing, but it helps me. That's a relativist view. It says that there's nothing true about my church. It just happens to be true for me. Relativism is pervasive. It is the worldview, the philosophy of our culture, and it is gaining traction. Okay? So remember that. So the two problems with relativism. The first one is it doesn't make sense logically. And the second one is it doesn't make sense practically. And let's talk about both of those. The logic of relativism. Again, ask the relativist this question. Is your claim that truth is relative or subjective a relative or subjective truth, or is that an objective truth? Think about that. Is your claim that all truth is relative a relative truth claim or an objective truth claim? Well, if it's a relative truth claim, then you have no reason to believe it because it could only be true for them. If it's an objective truth claim, then they've just admitted that there's such a thing as objective truth. So they've got a real problem logically. It doesn't make sense. You can't really hold relativism consistently. Is everybody getting that? Does that make sense? When you say all truth is relative, again, you're sort of, the view is kind of committing suicide on itself. If you're saying that, then that truth must also be relative, meaning only you are the one who believes it and we don't have to. Okay? Okay. Relativism is also impractical. Right? It's not practical. Remember, relativism is most often brought about in the context of morality. And in the context of morality, relativism is not practical because the concept being what is right for you is right for you and what is right for me is right for me is a ridiculous concept. And no one really believes it. Lots of people say they believe it, but no one really believes it. If I were to take the guy who says to me, what's right for you is right for you, what's wrong for, and what's right for me is right for me, and I smacked him across the face, do you think he'd still be a relativist? No, at that point, he's very objective. He says, that was wrong, but not for me, right? Not to mention things like murder and child abuse and rape and genocide and all these things. They all say those things are wrong when it comes to those things. What they really want to do is be relativistic about the things that they want to do. But when it comes down to the things where it might hurt them, relativism breaks down. They're no longer really a relativist. They're very objective about the things that protect them and very relative about the things that they want to do. So practically, nobody except sociopaths really practices relativism consistently. Okay? It only works for the morally wrong things that a relativist wants to do. Please don't test that and slap somebody. Or if you do, don't tell them that I told you to do it and get one of my cards because you'll need me. The next view of truth we're going to look at is called materialism. There was a show You all are probably too young to remember it. Back in it's probably the 70s, it might have been the 80s, and a guy named Carl Sagan, a show about the cosmos, and he came on the screen and he said, the universe is all there is, and all there was, and all there ever will be. That's materialism. Materialism says this universe, the stuff in the universe is all there is, all there was, and all there ever will be. Okay? There's nothing outside of what we can see, touch, taste, smell, hear. That's all there is. There's just what we can see. These are the guys, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Nacho Libre, but these are the guys like a Skeleto, right? I only believe in science, right? That guy. I only believe in what I can see. I only believe in what I can prove. That's materialism. They believe that the only truth is what exists in the universe and the stuff around it and what we can figure out from that stuff. And they call that facts. Facts are these scientific, materialistic truths that they've decided are truths. In other words, they believe that the only truth is what can be discovered through science. All other things like God and love and morals and goodness and justice, those are not truths. Those things are called values. That's what they call them. They're not facts, they're not truths, they're values. This worldview, materialism, is what has caused what philosophers refer to as the fact-value dichotomy. Now I'm going to tell you what that means because dichotomy is a strange word. But it's the fact-value split. It's a division between facts, which materialists say are real, and values, which materialism says are subjective, okay? Values are the things like goodness and morals and justice and God. Those are all things. Anything you can't see is going to be a value, and anything that they can prove in the way that they would suggest they can prove is going to be called a fact, okay? It's called the two-story view of truth. The two-story view of truth. Put that picture of that house up there if you don't mind, Robin. So the two-story view of truth, keep clicking until those things come up. There you go. Puts facts on the bottom level, on the ground, on the foundation is facts. And then up there in that upper level are values, like God and like all the things that you can't see. The facts are objective for a materialist. Those are real. Things like the stuff that you can see, those are real. But the values on that upper story, those are not real. Those are not truth. Those are not facts. Those are values. Right? So many people, I told you that relativism was the predominant view in society. In fact, is only half true. The real dominant view in society is materialism relativism, which is to say that we believe in the science things, those are true, but about everything that's a value, we're relativistic. So everything about morality and about God and about what you believe, those are all values and they are subjective, and everything that's material that we can see is a fact. Okay? Here's a problem. This fact-value dichotomy, this house that they've built, it's just an assumption. It's not based on science. It's a worldview created by those who have chosen to believe it. Simple question to this one. Can the statement that all truth or all reality is only what can be proven by science, can that statement be proven by science? The answer is no, by the way. The statement that they make, all facts are those things which we can prove by science, is not a statement that can be proven by science. Therefore, once again, we find that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The scientific worldview, the materialist worldview, it doesn't work because they can't even prove the assumption that gets them into the worldview, which is important. Because you need to remember that we all come into our worldviews with certain assumptions. The materialist has come in assuming from the beginning that there is no such thing as God, that there is no such thing as morality, that there is no such thing as justice and goodness, that there's only these things. But he didn't get there because he's a smart scientist and he didn't experiment. He got there because he assumed it. Now, we can go into the psychological reasons why someone might want to assume that God didn't exist, and there are a lot of them. Maybe they don't want to feel guilty when they do things that are wrong. I don't know. I don't like feeling guilty. But nevertheless, they've created it out of whole cloth. They've assumed it. Science can't prove the basis of their assumptions. Okay. In other words, they've defined the word truth to be only what they say it is, which I could do too. I could say, truth, the only thing that is true is whatever I say. And then I've defined the word truth to be whatever I say, but I've given you no reasons to believe that whatever I say is true. I've just defined it that way. That's what they've done. They pulled a fast one. And because they're really smart and they've got like those white lab coats and, and they're on TV and they got the Discovery Channel and we're all like, wow, these guys are really smart. And man, us dumb little Christians here, we just don't know anything. Well, guess what? They're just pulling a fast one on you. There's no substance to that view because they can't prove it. They can't prove it. It's just an assumption. So when you're developing your worldview, there's two more speakers that are going to talk today, and they're going to help you develop your worldview more. But one of the things, or maybe the most important sentence that I want you to remember from what I've said today, is that when you're developing your worldview, do not accept the assumptions of your critics. Do not accept the assumptions of your critics. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. When people have their worldview and you start to kind of get into it and you're talking to them, you're going to see that there's certain underlying assumptions that exist there, and they're going to want to talk to you with those assumptions, creating the rules for the conversation or the rules for the game. An example, when we watch the Discovery Channel, anytime you watch anything that's got like an animal in the thing, it's like, this animal was evolved from such and such and so and so. It's not like scientists theorize that this animal evolved. No, it's always this animal evolved from blah, 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 blah. So what are they doing there? They're making an assumption. They may even say they've got some evidence for it. They never show it. Surprise, surprise. But they may say they have an assumption, or they may say they have some evidence for it, but at the end of the day, they're making an assumption, and unless you stop and think and catch it, you will just accept it. Do not accept the assumptions of your critics. Whenever someone makes a statement of any kind to you about what's true or what's real or what's right or what's wrong, make sure that you are looking to the assumptions that are behind their statement. Because those assumptions oftentimes aren't valid. They aren't provable. They're not true. You cannot allow someone else to choose the rules of the game for you. Incidentally, contrary to what many people say, Christians are not against science. I'm not against science. I like science. Science is cool. But I have a realistic view of what science can do. See, science is become this thing, kind of like it's become a worldview. It's become a religion where if it's something is said by certain scientists, it sort of becomes the dogma, let's just call it the theology of that religion. If somebody says it, they don't necessarily have to prove it. But this is what science really does. It says, I took a bottle of water and I poured it into a pot and I heated it up until it reached 212 degrees, 2,000, that'd be a lot, 212 degrees, and it started bubbling. Then I took 2 bottles of water and I poured them in a thing, I heated them up until they reached 212 degrees and they started bubbling. I think that water starts to bubble at 212 degrees. That's science. That's all science is. It's nothing more than that. It can't describe for you anything more than that. It's what we can observe, test, and describe. That's all it is. That's all that it does. Anything beyond that is just a theory, and that theory may or may not be true in reality, but it's not necessarily science. The kind of science that anyone could say, makes up those facts that are really true. The only kind of science that can do that is what we observe to be true. Okay, so that's how Christians view science. It's not like that we're against it. We just try to rein it in from when it tries to go out into this other place that looks more like religion than like science. See, science can tell us a lot of things about boiling water and about, how far the moon is from the earth or whatever. It can tell us all kinds of things about the universe, but what it can never tell us, what science can never answer, is why the universe exists in the first place. It might be able to tell us why we think that water boils, but it cannot tell us why the universe exists, why you exist, why you have this sense inside you when you do something shady that it's wrong. Science can't describe that for you. It can't tell, it can't test it. It can't do anything about it. Science is just not equipped to deal with those things. But those things obviously have truths about them. There are things that are true about all of those things. There is a right and there is a wrong. Those things are true. There's something true about it. There really is an answer to whether or not, say, you should be able to abort an unborn child. There's an answer to that question. These people say one thing, these people say another thing, that guy over there says something different, but in the end, somebody's right and somebody's wrong. And science can never get to that answer for you. Okay, so we're just simply, as Christians, we're just simply realistic about science. And when somebody tells you that, oh, you're a Christian, you must be unscientific, or Christians and science don't mix, your answer to that is, no, Christians just understand what science is and don't take it beyond that. Okay? So here's the truth. Jesus told us that we would know the truth. He told us that we would know the truth and that the truth would set us free. The truth would set us free because ideas have consequences. And wrong ideas have wrong consequences. And good ideas have good consequences. And one of the good consequences of knowing the truth is that you become free. That when you accept the truth of Christ, you become free. He understood that, and he told us that. He also claimed, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He said, no man comes to me except no one comes to the Father except by me. No man comes to the Father except by me. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. This is a very non-relativistic claim by Jesus when he says, I am the way, not a way, not one of many ways. I am the way. I am the truth, and I am the life. And no one comes to the Father except by me. Very, very objective. Now, you'll have to decide what you want to do with Christ's claim about that. You'll have to decide what you're going to believe about it, what the evidence shows about whether or not he was God or not. But that's what he said, and there was nothing subjective about it. It was a purely objective thing that he said. He was claiming that he was real. Real, out there. Real, not in your mind. And that he was God. And of course, he provided many evidences that he was, in fact, God. To ignore Jesus, to ignore his claims would be foolish. He said there's a heaven and there's a hell, right? So to ignore that, it would be pretty silly. Our job is to analyze his claims and see if they're true. Well, most of us here believe that they are, and we have analyzed them. We do believe that they're true. We have a lot to gain and a lot to lose. So these things we cannot simply pass off like the materialist relativists and say, well, I don't really have to think about what Jesus said because I can stick that upstairs on the upper story of values. And of course, those are relative, so I don't really have to worry about it. No, what I'm telling you today is that there is a truth about everything. There's a truth about everything. One of those things are the claims of Christ, and we have to decide whether they're true. And when you are discussing this with someone, and when you are trying to share the love of Christ with someone, and they try to pass it off as something that is a private view of your own, that doesn't matter, it would be worth reminding them that, in fact, there is no such thing as that your private views can't make or break reality, that, in fact, Jesus either is real or he's not. In the end, the question between the materialists and the relativists and the Christians is who is right. Not who sounds better, not whose do I like better. Not which worldview fits me, what makes me feel good. The question is who's right. We can't all be right. They can't be right and us be right at the same time because we're saying different things. That's pretty obvious, right? So the question is, who has the best reasons to believe what they believe? I think I've shown you that the basic assumptions of these other worldviews are flawed at their very core, the very beginning of where they start. They're flawed. So their reasons really aren't very good. However, we have reasons that describe and explain the entire everything of what we can see, what we can know. All of it makes sense in the context of what the Bible tells us about who God is and what he's done. So what is your worldview? You've got one. We're not building it for the first time today. That's not the point. The point isn't that you've come in here kind of like blank slate like this and we're like filling you up with stuff and you're going to all of a sudden have this worldview. You've got one right now. So the question is, what is it? Have you accepted the assumptions of your critics? Are you really a relativist when it comes down to it? Or at least when you're too embarrassed to talk to your friends about what's really true? What is your worldview? What do you believe is really real? And if you believe that Jesus Christ is really real, like I do, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's the way, the truth, and the life. No one goes to the Father but by him. He's died. He's raised from the dead. He's forgiven my sins, and I get to live forever. I believe that. That's why I'm here. Rowing my oar, right? Like Brett said. That's what I'm trying to do. That's why I'm here, unashamed, because of that. Now, the question for you is, what do you believe? What do you believe?